Game 11. Gross and Microscopy Explained. In this class, we shall have a couple of gross specimens which can be kept for your spotter, practical, viva, and also form part of the theory in general pathology. This is the first specimen, the left ventricular hypertrophy. Why do I say it is a ventricle? Because I am finding two chambers. And the right ventricle, the left ventricle. When we do mount, you find that it appears reversed. The right ventricle has got a thinner wall, whereas the left ventricle I find is uniformly thickened. The walls, anterior wall, posterior wall, as well as the interventricular septum and the lateral wall are all uniformly thickened, and the lumen is correspondingly narrowed. This is a classical example of concentric hypertrophy. Concentric means you draw uniform circles around a dot, and that is called as concentric. All the areas are being uniformly thickened. In your examination, you are supposed to measure the walls of the specimen, diameter of the lumen, wall of the right ventricle as well, and the lumen. Now look at this. It is a specimen from an autopsy, and I find that the right ventricle is over here, left ventricle is markedly, the lumen is narrowed and it is markedly thickened. Again, an example of a concentric hypertrophy. So you will not be wrong if you say it is an autopsy specimen, because no man will be alive after the heart is removed. A description is always mandatory. So this can be a specimen for description, and it shall be described as given. This is a mounted specimen of the heart. Always I tell you people, because the specimen will be in the jar. They won't give you a wet specimen on hand. It shows both the ventricles and the interventricular septum. The left ventricle and the interventricular septum are uniformly thickened. The walls of the left ventricle and the interventricular septum measure -centimeter in thickness. Please do measure and write it. The right ventricular wall measures so many centimeters, and the left ventricular lumen is narrowed. It measures so many centimeters in diameter. And since the walls of the left ventricle are uniformly and concentrically thickened, it is a case of concentric hypertrophy. There are no areas of hemorrhage and necrosis. This will be important. If there is hemorrhage, there will be a reddish discoloration. If there is necrosis, there will be a grayish black discoloration. Both of these are not seen, and hence, finally, the diagnosis is left ventricular hypertrophy. Now, what can cause this hypertrophy? Obviously, this particular chamber is doing a lot of work. It is working against pressure. So, it can be physiological, as in the case of a hypertension that is untreated. Or sometimes, pathologically, it will be pumping against an aortic stenosis, where there will be pressure overload. It is the Archimedes principle. Whenever the pressure is applied at one particular point, it is transmitted equally in all directions. That is why all the walls are being uniformly thickened. There is another condition called as volume overload. I am sure you students will know aortic incompetence. The blood will go out of the chamber and again come back. Repeatedly, there is a lot of volume overload and pressure overload, and this leads to hypertrophy. I have been insisting on the word concentric hypertrophy, uniform thickness. But sometimes you find Only one part of the wall will be thickened, the others will be normal or even thinner. That is called eccentric hypertrophy. Eccentric hypertrophy is when there is a pressure at one particular point, that area becomes thickened. So this is the case of left ventricular hypertrophy. Concentric hypertrophy, eccentric hypertrophy, aortic incompetence, and then aortic stenosis. And the cardiac enlargement is given over here compared with the normal one. The cardiac enlargement, I find that there is a marked enlargement of the interventricular septum and the walls of the left ventricle, partly so in the right ventricle also. Sometimes you find that there can be an infiltration of the heart by means of amyloid. So just mention only one, infiltration by amyloid. And another differential diagnosis can be one condition called cardiomyopathy. Cardiomyopathy. But these are all differential diagnoses for you to score more marks. If you miss the common ones, we will lose the marks. So your mark will be on left ventricular hypertrophy, probably due to a pressure overload and a volume overload. And then this is just a normal heart slice showing the functions. There is another condition called atrophy of the testis. Atrophy is defined as a decrease in the size of the tissue or organ and also the weight. So I have kept a normal testis for comparison. Normal testis for comparison, and then there is a marked decrease in the size and the weight of this particular organ. And why do I say it is testis? It is because of there is an attached epididymis. There is an attached epididymis. That is how I diagnose. It is somewhat pear-shaped or round, and then there is an epididymis that is attached. And it is pinkish, indicating that it is viable, live. So decrease in the size and the number of cells. Definitions you people should know. And this is another example of it. Compare it with the normal testis. The measurements are over here. You people can measure and compare. So compared to this is markedly reduced. What can be the causes for an atrophic testis? It can be because of undescended testis, cryptorchidism, lack of hormonal stimulation, diminished blood supply, in some genetic conditions such as Klinefelter syndrome, aging. These are some of the causes for atrophy. So atrophy is a question for you people, and you people should be able to write. Atrophy testis is one specimen that is commonly kept, and please remember that the examiner will be having a panel of jars in front of him, and he will be bombarding you with questions. Do not be satisfied with just identifying. When you identify, immediately the next question will be, what are the causes? What is the difference between hypertrophy and atrophy? So I would like you people to kindly remember this. And this is the description. Mounted specimen, external surface, what is the measurement, what is the cut surface, and it is homogeneous, it is solid. And always in a testis, I'll be able to see strands of tissue. There are no areas of hemorrhage or necrosis, marked reduction in size. Therefore, the diagnosis is atrophy testis. I hope you people know this particular one, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A very famous movie those days. What am I trying to tell you people? Any guess why I am showing this? See, so I'm having the good, the bad, and the ugly. In a testis, you find that A student can be having either atrophy or gangrene as a specimen. And you people should be, in fact, both may be on the table of the examiner. You should be able to distinguish. Here it is edematous, swollen, blackish in discoloration. The epididymis is also swollen. And the capsule is stretched and shiny. So these are all things that we have already covered, and I hope you will be able to explain the differences. See you in game 12.